All right, welcome everybody to this week's edition of Heathen Talk with our usual hosts, myself, Torin. We've got Lauren, and Josh is away on a camping trip this week, so we're having Toby fill in for him. I'm sure you all remember him. Say hi, Toby.
Hello.
Toby
All right.
was the first ghost. Toby was the first guest host we ever had on our very first episode.
He really was. That means he's been on this show longer than I have. That's fantastic.
Not in airtime, because
Well, not in airtime, but in time. That means I can blame you for things without feeling like I'm blaming a guest.
Fair enough,
So,
I think.
we were going to start out by reminding everybody that we have some social media that you guys can all find us on. You can find us on Facebook.com/Heathen Talk. There's the live cast, of course, which if you're watching this right now, you'll know is YouTube.com/Heathen Talk. But if you are listening to this in archives and would like to listen to us live, which would be fantastic, you can see us at YouTube.com/Heathen Talk is our channel.
And if the more people who subscribe, the more rankings go up, and the more people that can find us.
Absolutely.
To say Josh's spiel.
That's better for everybody, honestly, because as you know, everybody else is doing it wrong. So the more people hear us, the more people will be doing it right.
Or at least less wrong.
Now, I know we have a number of other social media things that we could pimp out there, but to be perfectly honest with you, I am a social media Luddite, so I'm not going to bother pimping those. I will say, however, you can find links to most, if not all of those, on the Facebook.com page or on Reddit. So, over to you, Lauren.
All right, well, we have started a tradition on this show, and I guess we've done it enough times it's no longer a new tradition. I think this is our third or fourth time?
Something like that.
Yeah, something.
Well, Marcel was informal.
Yes, where we are toasting to members of the heathen community, active members of the heathen community, who are making a difference, who are contributing. Not just, keyboard warriors, but people who are actually out there in the trenches doing the hard work. And this week, the person that we're going to be toasting to is a prolific translator, heathen. His name is Dr. Ben Wagner. He has translated 5 sagas and then 6 sagas of adventure as a separate book, including the saga of Ragnar Lodbrok, which has been turned into an Audible book. He also has done. He also worked extensively on Our Troth and has had many other books that he has translated, and they're great. I mean, they're very good kind of modern translations. And he also for many years, has put feet on the ground traveling all over Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Texas, just really all over, kind of meeting people and trying to connect the very small population of heathens out this way in the Mid-South. So, to Ben, who is taking sagas that may have been forgotten and turning them into modern masterpieces. Hail.
Dr. Wagner.
Yeah.
He's probably going to kill me for calling him Dr. Wagner.
Well, the man has an honorific, and I don't know him, so I'll use it.
Herr Doctor.
Okay, so for those of you that haven't been paying any attention to the last show or to the Facebook page or to any of the other places where we've been pimping out the topic of today's show, today is going to be the first of a series of shows we're doing on really basic core heathen topics, things that are essential to be understood to properly begin to bring yourself into a heathen mindset. We're going to go ahead and start with one that has had a lot of discussion in many forums that I've seen before, from Reddit to Facebook to any of the other heathen or places that heathens gather online, and that's the subject of Frith. So it's no accident that Toby is our guest host today, taking Josh's place, because he is definitely somebody who is extremely conversant on the topic. He's done a lot of research on it from various topics to understand both how our ancestors thought of it and how it can apply today. So with that heavy burden laid upon your shoulders, Toby, I think we should just go ahead and dig right in.
Well, thanks, Torin. So one of the challenges here is that we want to go a little bit deeper than the surface of the topic. And Frith is kind of a dead horse that we've been beating and beating for as long as I've been a heathen. I've been discussing it, and it was an old topic when I joined, those many moons ago. Not really, it wasn't.
And yet, still, we can't decide what it exactly means, and a lot of people just flat out don't understand it. I won't say we can't decide what it means, but I'll definitely say a lot of people just don't understand it, or they misunderstand it, or they were taught incorrectly. I mean, what I learned Frith was as a baby heathen 10 years ago, 15 years ago, isn't correct.
Well,
yeah,
see, there's really good reasons for the misunderstandings of Frith, for the reasons that that it gets taught incorrectly, and that some people, even being taught Frith correctly, choose to interpret it in incorrect ways. And it's because it's not necessarily the most comfortable thing in a modern society. And I think we're going to go over a lot of the reasons for that today. But the fact of the matter is that the society that the overculture, if you will, that heathenry exists within, is not one set up to understand and deal with the bonds of Frith. And as a result, it makes holding Frith, in a lot of cases, more difficult today than it was for our ancestors. And people don't want to necessarily admit that in a lot of cases. And it ends up being a subject then that gets either taught incorrectly or just flat out ignored.
Mm-hmm. And those are excellent points, and that's definitely something that I want to get into a little bit later, because I do think that Frith is a topic that is often misunderstood because it is not one that can be understood. It must be experienced in order to grok it in the Heinleinian sense, to understand it whole and complete as a single unit. I want to start off with a quote from Culture of the Teutons, which is probably foundational. If you want to have an academic understanding of Frith, you really have to read the first chapter of this book. Briefly, we must begin with the kin, the race or family, a gathering of individuals so joined up into one unit that they appear incapable of independent action. As to the feeling which so unites them, we must leave till later. The point here is the individual cannot act without all acting with and through him. No single individual can suffer without affecting the whole circle. So absolute is this connection that the individual simply cannot exist by himself. A slight loosening of the bond, and he slips down, the most helpless of all creatures. So, I hate to sit here and just quote from books, because it's not scripture. We're not quoting scripture here. But the concept of Frith, to be understood academically, you have to understand that it was a delineation of how you perceive the world. What happened within the bounds of your inner yard, what happened within the family unit, was family business. And outside the family unit, that was inter-family business, and nobody had a right to step into my family business without stepping into, without stepping over their bounds, without actually breaking the bonds of good taste. The things. Why is this important? Why do we deal with this? I'll go ahead and start, but I'd love to hear the Lauren and Torrance thoughts on this. Why is Frith important? Because without a proper understanding of Frith, without actually feeling it and getting a sense of it, you're going to remain on some level disconnected from the elder heathen. And without understanding the elder heathen as best as you can, and to be fair, you will never actually grok the elder heathen. I think you can grok Frith, but I don't think you can actually understand the elder heathen perfectly. There's just too many variables and too much time. But that just because that isn't a possible goal doesn't mean that it's not something that we should work towards and practice towards all our lives. Nobody nobody is actually perfect in their life, but perfection is not something we shouldn't pursue. So I'd like to hear what you guys think of why Frith is important.
Well, the thing about Frith, and you're absolutely correct, Toby, to begin with, is that you do need to understand it if you're ever going to, approach understanding of the ancient heathen. But I think from a more modern point of view, from a more current point of view, that Frith is important for us to properly understand and properly facilitate community bonds. Heathenry, as we've beat to death, is very much a community religion. It's everything we do is about the community structure. The smallest unit of individuality in the heathen world is the family, and it's only within the family that you can see an individual. So without being able to properly understand Frith, you can't properly understand how the modern heathen mind should work. And that goes back to understanding the ancient heathen. This brings us into the concept that to hurt the family is to hurt oneself. And if you don't begin to understand Frith, then you can't really understand why that isn't actually a thing, because you will remain in the overculture's concept of the individual, and that is something that is really hard to escape. It's been beat into us for over 1,000 years at this point.
Lauren?
Do we still have Lauren?
Not sure.
It sounds like we've lost Lauren for a second. We'll try to get her back as soon as we can.
Okay. So, Lauren hit the button on her microphone. We'll edit this.
There we go.
Okay. I have to agree with both of you. I think you both brought up really good points. When it comes down to, I'm going to give the Reader's Digest condensed version, it is foundational for really understanding heathenry. It's foundational for understanding. I feel like if you don't understand Frith, it's hard to understand right action. It's hard to understand how those decisions are made, and it just seems like it's such a cornerstone of knowing how to operate within the framework of the belief system. And you guys pretty much said everything else, so.
I think that's a good point that you bring up, that it's foundational. It's the bedrock upon which everything else rests. Because in the heathen worldview, and for me, heathenry is all about worldview, which is a topic for a different show, and the fundamental conflict between worldview being orthodoxy and an orthopraxic religion. That's fair. But for the purposes of this conversation, the closer you get to a heathen worldview, the more you're going to actually understand the religion. And I think the really important part on that is, if you don't have a good foundation, if you don't understand what you're doing, you're never going to understand anything else in context.
Well, I think to put a quick period on what you're talking about the worldview isn't necessarily an orthodox thing in an orthopraxic religion, when you understand that from worldview flows action. Mm-hmm. So we're actually kind of doing it in reverse. Because we have an orthopraxic religion, we need to have the correct worldview, because action flows from worldview. I just thought that might tie a bow on that real quick.
Yeah.
And tune in a few weeks for Worldview Beyond the Basics.
We'll get there eventually.
But
okay.
So we've talked about why Frith is important, but I think that to get everyone on the same page, and to get so that we can have a discussion where we're using the same definitions, defining Frith. And I think the quote that you shared earlier was really great to kind of start that.
Sure. Frith is the state of things which exist between friends, and it means, first and foremost, reciprocal inviolability, However, individual wills may clash, and a conflict of kin against kin, however stubbornly individual heads may seek their own way, according to their quota of wisdom, there can never be a question of conflict, save in the sense of thoughts and feelings working their way towards an equipoise of unity.
So now that we've gotten, a dictionary definition of it, how would you put that into words that the reader is likely to understand, or the listener is likely to understand?
I've often defined it as the concept of understanding the inviolability. I like that term that Grunbeck uses. It at a fundamental level, at a level below logic or reason. You believe in that your family has your back and you are safe from harm there, like we believe in atoms. I've never seen an atom. I will never see an atom. Nobody can come in here and give me a little thing that says, here's an atom. Take a look at it, touch it, manipulate it. But I believe in them because that's foundational for how I understand the physical world and the scientific world works. Atoms are the building blocks of matter. Yes, it gets a little bit more complicated than that, but for the purposes of this discussion, I believe in Frith, like I believe in atoms. It's at the level of knowledge, not faith.
Well, I guess, I can start with the easy soundbite definition, or rather, not so much definition, but just a way of putting it, that Frith is the idea that home is where you're never broke and you'll never need bail money. It's an idea that you can always count on your family, as you said. And I know that we're going to get into the idea of, biological family versus non-biological family eventually, because it honestly has to be covered. But it's the idea that, like you said, these are people who can absolutely be counted on in any situation. You know that you will be provided for. You know that if you are in trouble, you will be helped. And you know, on the flip side, that you have that obligation to help in that situation. I think Frith comes down to the bettering of the tribe and the benefit, that all things be to the benefit of the tribe. It is the ultimate expression of good in the heathen worldview, being that which is constructive to the tribe is good and that which is destructive to the tribe is bad. That, Frith really just comes down to the ultimate expression of good.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Lauren?
I think, once again, that comes from what you're saying. That comes back to what I was saying earlier about why it is so important. Frith is so important to be able to say, okay, well, I have this. It really is an obligation, and I'm not trying to use that in a negative sense, and that's a phrase that gets often in kind of the overculture as negative, but it really is this obligation that you have that is reciprocal, that is, exactly that. You may not have to like them, but you got to stand with them and take care of them.
Mm-hmm.
And that once again, what is good for the tribe is good, which is kind of the bedrock of heathen ethics. Well, you have to understand what the tribe, by understanding Frith, and with Frith, that's understanding who the tribe is. That's understanding your obligations under that.
Well, I guess, going down the route of Frith as an obligation, you can look at Frith as a debt. And I use that word because I want to express that it's a debt that is both owed from you and is owed to you at the same time. So that kind of frees the negative connotation of it a little bit, in my mind anyway, is that, yes, this is a debt that you owe to your tribe, to your family, to your kin, but it's also a debt they owe you, so you kind of break even on it, at least in theory. And which again, I keep accidentally pimping things that are going to definitely have to come up in this episode, is the idea of an uneven debt in that situation. But trying to take away, you were saying, that there is that negative connotation in the overculture to the idea of an obligation, is that yes, you are obliged to do certain things when you hold frith with people, but they are obliged to do the same for you when the need arises.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, so we get to this concept of frith as being an obligation. One thing I wanna stress is that because frith is so foundational, because frith exists at a level below logic, reason, or thought, it's also fundamentally sacred. And for something to be sacred, that means it has to be set apart. That means a frith extended to just anyone is a frith extended to everyone, which means that frith has no meaning. Which brings us to the concept: if you understand frith, you understand that you do not owe it to everyone, and it is not owed to you by just anyone. And that leads to a clearer sense of the dynamics of a relationship. And that's something we're a little bit fuzzy in the modern culture. We tend to look at everybody as, hey, we're all one big happy family, and we're not. We're not. We're definitely not. Families have meaning. Families are sacred. Families are set apart. And so understanding that, and then speaking to somebody who also or interacting, not just speaking, interacting, having a relationship with somebody who also understands that, is far more productive and far deeper, and can go deeper, because it's built on a mutual understanding of what that means. Because in truth, nobody, when the chips are down, you cannot count on just anyone. So I think. Go ahead.
Go ahead. Don't worry, Lauren will edit this out tomorrow.
Friday, but yeah.
Well, I was going to try to patch in a little bit of a discussion that Toby and I had earlier with Josh on this subject, that kind of tying in the idea of some of the many misconceptions surrounding frith. And one of them, and I think this is an awful lot of what causes people to try to extend it too far, is the misconception that frith is in some way also implies being nice to people. And it's important to note that you don't have to be nice to somebody to support them. The idea of this fulfilling this obligation also requires you to be polite. And I think the discussion came up with the idea of when dealing with strangers, we're often more polite than we are with our own kin. But the reason for this comes down to, our modern ideas of civility require that politeness to strangers. On the flip side, when it comes to how the frith bronze work with that, I can have a family member that I completely hate, but I will not hesitate to throw that stranger I was having a polite question with under a literal bus if I need to do that to save my kin, even if I don't like my kin. If that makes any sense.
It does. Lauren?
I think that that's definitely true, and I don't, it's like I've said, I don't have to like you to love you, is how it's often put in the South. It's definitely, I think, you see in historically, people still maintain frith while, arguing with each other or whatever. It's not, I think frith is so beyond situational that sometimes we think that frith, we try to apply frith. Sometimes I think one of the biggest problems is people confuse frith and grith. and try to make Frith apply across things like Facebook pages and email groups and, I'm going to date myself, BBSs. But they try to call something a Frithstead, an online Frithstead, and it just no. You're doing it wrong.
Didn't we used to use that catchphrase way back in the day? I thought we did. See, now this goes back to something we said, that if you don't look at what you were doing 5 years ago and aren't completely embarrassed, then you're heathening wrong. Because you should just continue to learn and grow as a heathen. We are definitely not in a position where we know everything at this point. So, yeah. Because I knew I wasn't going to be the only one to remember that, so I figured I'd just go ahead and out us right there.
That was actually Brian quoting a mutual friend, Ian, who's also a Marylander. And I'll be seeing this weekend at Summerstowe for the first time, so I'm excited. Pulling back, before we get into the Frith versus Grith thing, and honestly, that's part of beating the dead horse. If you don't understand the differences between Frith and Grith by this point, you are either an absolutely new baby heathen, and this topic isn't really aimed at you, or you're being dutifully ignorant and not paying and aren't watching this anyway. But
I just felt that it needs to be put out there. It needs to be said.
You're absolutely right. And to give the definition, Grith means peace in the way that Frith is often translated to mean. Grith is a temporary, locational-based Frith, or locational-based peace imposed upon a place by the owner of that place or the temporary lord of that place. Typically, we talk about it in terms of the king's peace is Grith.
Well, I mean, yeah, to bring up Iceland for just a second, because we got to do it occasionally.
Ice. Nah, never mind.
Let's not get that argument started. No, I during the for the ancient heathens during the thing, when that was started, that was a situation that was under the protection of Grith, and I believe there are sagas where that's even pointed out once or twice when violence was about to be committed over imagined slights, or violence had been committed and people were stopped from taking vengeance on the spot. And that's a very important subject to understand. It's definitely one of the places where the sagas can help understand what Grith is, just because you get to see a real-world application of it, even if it was a real-world application from 800 years ago.
Well, and for any of you who are listening who are gamers, the way that I understood Grith, it just clicked for me, was it's like in the game Vampire the Masquerade when you have the Elysium. It's true. You know that dream I had last night where Toby revoked my heathen card may in fact happen now.
Why would you bring up such a dorky idea like playing Vampire the Masquerade? Everybody knows that the cool kids play Shadowrun.
See, I'm actually running Apocalypse World tomorrow night, but normally I play Pathfinder on Thursdays.
All right.
Everybody on Thursdays for our Geekcast.
Yeah. Oh, man. So, okay, sorry.
So, one of the things I wanted to, I started to get into there is the concept that you don't have to like somebody to extend them Frith is the 101 version of Frith. It really helps people get over the hump of, well, I hate my cousin Joe. He is a complete jerk. I don't want anything to do with him. And you don't have to like him. You just have to support him. That's 101. The next step is we're going to turn everything around on its face, because the impetus of that conversation that Torin, Josh, and I had gotten into was the idea that because we are safe doesn't give us right to shit in our family's cornflakes. If I can use a vulgarity. Just because it's easier to be awful to our family doesn't give us the right to. And by remaining cognizant, we have the obligation to treat our family better than we treat our neighbors, than we treat our the stranger in the stranger in the street. Not that we have to treat them badly. Hospitality still applies. It's just the proper ordering of our understanding of what the world is. That's the most important piece of Frith, getting beyond just a simple, well, in this situation, and people will, you can tell people are very uncomfortable with that because they come up with a lot of circumstances, and you know, there's a lot of, well, what if X happens? How does Frith apply and why? What happens if there's what happens if you steal from your mother? How does Frith apply there? These are all symptoms of how uncomfortable modern people are with the concept of the obligation of Frith. So I want to kind of acknowledge it. It exists. Yes, it's uncomfortable. It's dangerous. Frith is the basis of most tragedies in the ancient literature. And it is also incredibly important, and it's incredibly rewarding. To know Frith is to know a joy unlike very few others. The one I can most liken it to is the joy of being a parent. You have to deal with poop. You have to deal with violent kids. You have to deal with this horde of barbarian creatures that are destroying everything that you love about your home and family life. And you do that day in, day out, and you can't kill them. You cannot kill them. You cannot do anything but love them and support them. And then one day, it sort of gives you that joy. And not one day, every day.
Well, I mean, the whole thing here that you were just saying put me in mind of kind of bringing in a new angle on the topic of Frith, while at the same time addressing the idea of dealing with, uncomfortable situations in your family. Is the new angle I want to bring in is, first of all, the idea, and this is a misconception of Frith that I see on a regular basis. It pops up in almost every conversation on the internet about Frith. Is that I'm talking to each individual listener of this show, you cannot choose to break Frith with someone in your family. That is not an option with Frith. That is not how Frith works. It is not your choice. It is the choice of the family. The clan is who decides whether Frith is broken, because it's important to understand that, and this goes back to the topic I brought up earlier, that the idea of Frith really comes down to the idea of what is good and what is evil. That which is constructive is for the clan is good, that which is destructive for the clan is bad. Probably the most destructive thing that can happen to a clan or to a family is to break Frith with a member. It's like cutting off a part of your own body. And it's true, we especially in modern day know that, sometimes you have to cut off a part of your body in order for the rest of the body to survive. But that is an absolute extreme option. And now I brought that up because what Toby was saying put me in mind of, relatively painful example from my own family. is that I had a cousin who, when she got older, she came out as gay, and her mother disowned her when this happened. While she didn't put it in terms of Frith, my aunt is not a heathen. Essentially, what she did is she chose on behalf of the family to break Frith with my cousin. Now, my mother backed her on this as well, which was quite embarrassing to me. The amazing part about this is that despite my aunt and her husband, my uncle, and despite my mom choosing to go ahead and go along with this, the Frith was never broken because the family didn't break Frith with my cousin. In fact, my grandmother, who, Lauren, you said the "I don't have to like you to love you" comment. Yeah. You referenced it being very Southern. My grandmother is straight up a Swedish immigrant. She said that to me all the time because I was a little shit.
I believe it.
Who wouldn't? My grandmother is the undisputed ruler of my family. I have no idea who's going to replace her when she finally dies, and I think that's the reason she hasn't, is because she doesn't trust anybody else to take over. But she told them both they were being idiots. They didn't want to listen to her. So the next holiday that rolled around, I believe, was Thanksgiving. It's always held at my grandmother's house. My cousin was invited, and she showed up. Caused all sorts of uproar in my family. And they told her she wasn't welcome there. My grandmother told them to shut the hell up. It wasn't their choice. Christmas rolled around, she was invited again, and she showed up. And again, there was an uproar. She was told she wasn't welcome. My grandmother told everybody to shut the hell up. Come Easter, there was no uproar anymore. Come Easter, they realized that that wasn't really their choice to just disown her from the family because they didn't like her personal choices in life. She wasn't doing anything to hurt them. She wasn't doing anything to hurt the family. And as a result, Frith was never broken, and the family never chose to break Frith, despite what a couple of individuals wanted to do. And this has always been the best illustration in my mind of the idea that, as I said before, and I'll say it again, you, the individual listening to the show, cannot choose to break Frith in your family.
Now, here is a question that I have for you guys. What does family extend to? That has always been actually a question that I've not... Here you go. You're going to hear a heathen admit they don't know something. Everybody prepare for the incoming apocalypse. But that's something that I've honestly struggled with because of coming from a family that's so geographically split apart and not really knowing extended family that well.
Torin, go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and start off here by saying that this is definitely one of those places I believe that falls into there's not necessarily a right way to do it, but there are a lot of wrong ones. There's really no single answer to the question of who is your family. And I believe it's really situational to the family, and that it would largely boil down to the family that interacts, if that makes sense. You know, your mother and your father are definitely family. If you have brothers and sisters, they are certainly family. Your grandparents, let's start by going ahead and saying anybody in a direct line descent from you, or rather direct line descent to you or from you, is certainly under the bonds of Frith. And there are going to be situations, depending on how your family's structured and what kind of community you live in, where that's going to begin to extend to your aunts and your uncles and your cousins, if you live in the kind of family where you actually know these people. And that's part of the problem, again, that goes back to the modern versus the ancient. There would have been little question about this amongst the ancient heathens. But we have to ask these questions today.
I actually have to disagree with you right there that there was no question about it, because the law codes that we see are pretty explicit on defining who your family is and who is considered kin. And I believe it went out to fifth cousins in Anglo-Saxon England. I'm probably wrong there. I kind of want to jump in here and I almost want to apologize, and I'll go ahead and apologize because this is a totally unhelpful answer, except that it is the only right answer, and it is, I admit, a complete tautology. Your family is whoever you extend Frith to, whoever you share Frith with. Frith
That is equally unhelpful tautology.
Yes.
Sorry.
I understand that.
Well, the reason I bring this up is because in my own family, I have cousins who I have maybe seen 4 times in my life. And I have cousins who I speak to quite regularly, and they've been a big part of my life. So sometimes for me, and I realize this is also Christian guilt baggage sneaking up on me, and I recognize it, is to, deciding, okay, well, I extend Frith to this cousin because they're actually a part of my life versus this person who I've not seen since I was 8 and don't really remember other than they're obnoxious on Facebook.
Right. I extend Frith to my cousins because I grew up with them. And on the flip side, something that some people would not necessarily say was a requirement, I extend Frith to my stepmother and her daughters as my stepsisters, and even to her mother, who recently passed away. I would have taken a bullet for that woman. She was amazing, and she was always accepting of me, even as I came in as a mostly grown stepchild. But there are probably out there close family members that I don't even know I have that are definitely closer to me than my step-siblings that I wouldn't necessarily extend Frith to because I don't even know who they are. And so I guess this kind of gets around to, what I was saying earlier and what I'm saying now, being a way to make Toby's tautology sound a little bit nicer, is that there is a certain amount of choice involved. And the main reason that I would have, kind of preferred Toby didn't say that out loud is because it does really kind of bring in the idea that someone does choose who to extend Frith to and who not to extend Frith to.
And I'll admit that's something I didn't necessarily even understand up until today, exactly because of, statements like that. Frith is who you, families who you extend Frith to is always been, that's always been, that tripped me up, and I've been around a long time.
Well,
go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead, Toby.
The thing I was going to say is that I extend Frith to everyone that my family, those that I have formally included in that familial bond, those that I extend Frith to. And then to a lesser extent, but still to a certain amount of extent, there's an obligation that I extend out one degree of separation there. For example, for a good example of that is my parents treat the kin I have back in Georgia as family because they are my family. So they are always welcome in my parents' home. They will always have a place to stay. They will always have a meal in their belly because they are extending that through the relationship that I have with them, through me to them. And I would do the same for my family. Like if the brother of a man I call kin were to come to me and seek shelter and help, I would extend him a certain amount of not just hospitality, but true a bond of Frith through that relationship that I shared with his compatriot, through that relationship I have with my kin. And I do that strictly based, and I'm upfront about it. You will always have a place here because you are a friend of my friend is my friend. Now his friends, it's a different question entirely. But it's one of the ways that I see upon honoring the ties that I have with that person.
Well,
and go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was saying this is kind of bringing me around to realizing that I do have a slightly better way to answer Lauren than what we've been giving her, is that Frith isn't, or family isn't who you decide to extend Frith to. Frith, or family is who your family decides to extend Frith to. If that makes sense.
Or recognize, or you don't extend Frith, you recognize its existence.
Recognize the existence of Frith. I mean, it's that whole concept of, you know, there pretty much anybody's gonna have a few people that they don't question the Frith bond with. So you look to those few people from the beginning and see who they're extending Frith to. See who they are acknowledging the existence of Frith with. And that tells you who you should be acknowledging the existence of Frith with. And that kind of goes back into, you know, like I said, that whole concept with my family trying to cut off or a small portion of my family trying to cut my cousin off. If you look to the rest of my family, it was extremely obvious that there was no cutting off of Frith there. And while that doesn't necessarily, you know, isn't necessarily the same scenario as what Lauren was talking about, it's the same concept of Frith is a family decision, not an individual decision. So, yeah, look to who your family acknowledges Frith with, and that tells you who you should acknowledge Frith with.
And that's an excellent point, and it gets to the danger of Frith. And this is something I want to underscore. People assume that this has to be easy. It's not. It's really hard. It places demands upon us that are not simple. Well, no, they are simple, but they are not easy. And the entire literature, the sagas, like Volsung Saga, all of them have, in some measure, the running plot line of conflicting bonds of Frith. And it leads to tragedy. And that's at the core of the acknowledgement of the power and the impact that Frith has upon us, is that it can build somebody up and it can destroy them. And that doesn't mean it's not important. That doesn't mean it's not necessary. And Lauren, I'll let you have the last word. It's your show.
Well, I just want to say I appreciate kind of these viewpoints coming in, because I think the idea that seeing who your family extends Frith to is a really good starting point to what will eventually become more for examination. So I really do appreciate that, especially when it comes to your blood family.
Right. You know, like Toby was saying, Frith is not an easy thing. Frith is the exact opposite of that. It is, as we discussed earlier, it is an obligation. And that's why I wanted to get into the topic of chosen family. I know very few people in my life that don't have at least one individual that they consider family in every way, despite that person not having any blood ties to them. I have a very small handful of them myself, and I think I think the reason I even have as many as I do, despite the small number, is just because I've never lived in one place for very long, at least not until I moved here. So I don't have my family surrounding me, and ultimately I've found family. And that happens to a lot of us in the modern day. We don't live in an era anymore where we are born, grow up, live, and die within the same 25 square mile area. We live in an era where we hit the age of 18, graduate high school, and move 3,000 miles away because that was where the job was, or that was where the school was, or because that place looked cool and we just kind of wanted to go there. It's a capability that we have that wasn't really commonly available to our ancestors. And we often end up with these people that are every bit as close to us as family are. But I don't want to, and that's why I never shit on the idea of people who have that friend who they call brother. And I don't mean brother in the figurative sense that we're constantly telling newbies to stop calling us brother. I mean, in the I've sat down and thought about this, and I consider this person a brother or a sister. Um, Sorry, somebody can talk while I'm gathering my thoughts. I stalled out there.
Well, I think that is kind of the how that, to a degree, I think a lot of the early new this I don't know, and I'm sorry guys, my brain is, I've had too much school today. I think that to some degree is how a lot of early within the revival kindreds or theodes or tribes or hearths or whatever you want to call them started, by people who bonded over this sincere shared idea and goals and became like family.
Well, actually, you mentioned the groups, both the early, and I'll even bring this into, the current ones that are popping up, or that have only been around for a few years. That's a really, really good place to look at the bonds of Frith. Is these groups that choose to at least think they're choosing to extend Frith to one another. Is you see these groups that fall apart when the Frith Braun gets challenged. When people contribute above and beyond, but when they're in trouble don't have any help. And you see these groups just collapse. But then there's other groups that you see that rise to that challenge. And that's where you can truly see what the bonds of Frith mean. We had Brian on last week, and he mentioned his obligations to his tribe as their chieftain. And those are, I don't know whether in White Marsh they consider the bonds of Frith to be extended on the Theode. But, excuse me, but listening to his actions, talking about that, when he is called at 3 in the morning, when he has to be at work at 6, he will drive 20 miles to go change a tire. He will open up his wallet despite not having much because somebody else in his Theode has less. And I know that I've seen it in my own tribe at this point, despite the fact that we're relatively young and small. I've seen everybody in my tribe, whether it be myself or the other members, have opened up and they have helped the others when the others were in need. And that is where the burden of Frith becomes apparent, and it's that you have to look at with the concept of chosen family. Are those burdens met? Are those obligations met? Somebody who I've been calling brother for quite a while now, I'm lucky enough to live next to now, and we're back and forth to each other's place constantly. We're borrowing each other's car without asking. Well, I mean, we say, hey, can I have the keys? But there's never any question about whether or not that's going to be extended. It's, hey, I need $20, or, any other number of things like this. We don't keep count. We don't say no. We support, and we tell each other when we're being idiots. And these are largely what the obligations of Frith come down to.
That's
I'm trying to figure out how to disagree with me.
No, I'm not trying to. I'm trying to find a way to. The problem people have with Frith, the thing that causes the discomfort and the constant, well, what about this situation? Or what about this situation? What about this situation? When we get down to it, Frith is probably the very first esoteric mystery of our religion that you're going to get into. You're not going to understand it until you experience it. And you're not going to experience it until you extend it. Until you place yourself either by performing for that person, but fundamentally the real test of Frith is when you need it. When you need that support, that love, that protection to occur. It places you in a moment of vulnerability that is inherently uncomfortable. The first time you do it, the first time you find yourself in that place, is you are back to being a toddler and being unable to feed, clothe, or do for yourself. And it strips away all the pride, all the comforting lies that we tell ourselves that, hey, I'm a total badass, I can handle anything that comes my way, till you find you can't, because, and I'm going to quote Brian again from a different talk, it's a lot easier to keep your eyes on the prize when you got other people watching your back. But you have to trust those people watching your back aren't going to stab you in it. And that's a very uncomfortable position when you don't know. And you won't know until you do it.
Lauren, you haven't spoken in a bit.
Sorry, I was on the edge of a sneezing fit.
Fair.
That's what I get for not having my camera on tonight. Well, you know, I think that to a large degree, I think you really hit on something, Toby, with it being something esoteric. Because I know a lot of people who are heathens who aren't necessarily comfortable with that kind of thing. There is, to a degree, especially when you look at the first generation revivalists, people like having, and it's baggage, they like having parameters, they like having hard definitions, and, well, if X then Y. And then turn around when you look at something like Frith, they have a much easier time with, and this comes down to kind of another pet peeve of mine, Thor is the god of thunder, or, whatever. It's a situation where having to kind of get into the gooey wooey stuff makes people uncomfortable. And as a whole, as humans, we don't particularly like being uncomfortable. We don't like discomfort. It's something we usually try to avoid.
Well, you bring up a great point that I think definitely works from the conversation of Frith, but also is a great broad point for heathenry in general, especially as it compares to the religions of the overculture, the common religions, is that people come into heathenry. We've mentioned the Christian baggage many times. And that's going to be one of the reasons why they're looking for lists and equations to figure out how to fill in their faith, as it were. They're looking for the if X then Y type of thing. They're looking for, give me a hard definition of whose family as far as Frith goes. But as Toby brings up, that you understand Frith when you've experienced Frith. That these are instinctual concepts. But how do we develop instinctual concepts? We develop them by living them. As Toby pointed out, which is why it's so damn difficult to heathen right. Is because in order to do it right, you have to do it right. Here's another tautology for you tonight. But I bring that up to illustrate the fact that any religious system is going to have difficulties like these. You can go to a religion like Christianity that has a holy book that has supposedly all the answers in it for you to live your life by, that is supposed to be an instruction book to go by. And what's the first thing people do once they have these hard and fast instructions written down in front of them? They figure out how to lawyer around it to make themselves feel better or to benefit themselves. I can quote a number of examples from various Abrahamic religions where there are things that are ingrained into the orthodoxy at this point that are really just ways of lawyering around the words that are in holy books. But on the flip side, in heathenry, our big crippling moment where they lawyer around their rules is us just not.
Hey, Torn.
Sorry.
You're breaking up, buddy.
Okay, then you guys talk until my connection catches up.
Okay, I wanna argue with you a bit here, Torin, because from my experience, I don't see it as Christian baggage. I see it as anti-neo-pagan backlash. Anything mystical and woo and touchy-feely is immediately can be I've seen tons of times being thrown off as Wicca true or New Age or whatever.
Well, I'm gonna have to ask you in this situation to tell me where's the woo here.
Yeah, you still can't stand.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to disagree with you, Lauren,
Okay.
and say that it's a human thing. If X, then Y. It's a very human instinct to want to have these clear-cut rules. I mean, when you get right down to it, the Psalms, there are a bunch of treaties, and I'm braining hard, or not braining well tonight. There are a bunch of treatises that talk about, in this situation, do this. Proverbs and sayings of wisdom. The Havamal is an if X then Y construction. It goes deeper than that. But human beings have this urge to, okay, just tell me what the rules are.
Well, I think that the thing is, you brought up the word esoteric.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I kind of went to, that's where my thoughts jumped into the very anti-neo-pagan backlash. Well, anything that's esoteric is inherently woo and bad and Wiccan.
Okay.
I cannot tell you how many times that I've heard almost that statement verbatim. So, like I said, there's baggage there from people who also don't want to appear to be, for people who are still stuck on the 9 noble virtues, they don't want to be seen as weak and not self-reliant, or don't want to be called Wicca true, or they. That's where I'm going.
So yeah, there is a fundamental reaction to anything that's not clear-cut and dry. I don't know that. I think it's couched in that terms. I think you might have a point there that it's couched in those terms because that's the language that we speak in heathenry. But I think you're going to find this go around of. It's a mystery. It's something you have to experience to know, and logic and reason can lead us to everything. I mean, that dichotomy there is as old as human thought. I mean, you find that in Greek philosophy. It's as ancient as we can trace back. So you're right in the sense that it does exist and it's couched in that language. I think it's important to recognize that it's a more universal theme in human interaction than just something that's unique to heathenry.
Well, I mean, I guess for me, am I breaking up anymore? Or am I coming through?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, you're really breaking up. Why don't we take a couple of questions, and we'll see if we can't get Torin to come back. So I'm going to work from the top here. Simpatico asked, this may be a question for the presenters, but tell me if I'm off on this. Is Frith something... Is Frith something that, in fact, can be extended? Toby earlier seemed to suggest that Frith is pre-rational, maybe even pre-conscious. Decision, by contrast, is rational and conscious. The decision to extend Frith seems to weaken the deep bond that is characterized in this pre-conscious, pre-rational element of Frith. If my understanding is correct, Frith grows naturally after living close with someone for a long time. Example, a wife that marries into a tribe from the outside. Does that sound right?
I think this is a great question. question, and I think extended in the terms of the asking or the action, the verb to extend is not the best word to use. Like we got to in the Frith conversation earlier, it's really the recognition that Frith exists. It's really understanding something that is there through the concept of welcoming them into the tribe. This gets a little off topic, but I think it's important to recognize the idea that rites of passage, that rituals recognizing changes of status are not the cause of that change of status, but the recognition of it. And so, while we may have a ritualized recognition that Frith is extended, either through, say, oathing into a fictive kinship of a Theod, or into or oathing into a kindred, or marriage, adoption, blood brotherhood. All of these things are recognitions, not magico-religious rituals designed to enforce that change. I don't go up to a stranger, shed my blood. Now we're blood brothers. Now he has to extend me Frith. That's not how it works. You can't force that. The ritual is there to recognize the development of that relationship.
Doran, you want to try it?
I'd love to, but I have no idea what question we're answering either. So.
I was just making sure you were actually back with us. We are up on the first question in the chat that should be posted in the chat from Simpatico. And you're not, I don't think you're coming through on your new mic. I think you're coming through on your headset mic. Yes, indeed.
Well, give me 1 minute to rectify that.
Okay. I think that what you've hit on there.
Okay,
I'll just
go ahead and use this mic for the time being instead of dealing with the issues of figuring out why it switched. So, yeah, again, repeat the question to me, please. I'm sorry.
It's really long, but basically the question comes down to, is Frith something that can actually be extended, or is it something that it's pre-rational or even maybe pre-conscious?
Yeah, the question that Simpatico asked earlier, I did read
Yes.
that. Well, I would say that the idea that Frith can be extended is it's a bit of verbiage that I think we use for convenience. I think Frith does just kind of happen. You just wake up and realize it one day in situations where it's not automatic, to somebody who's not, your blood kin. You do just kind of realize that you are already in a relationship of Frith with this person. And we use the idea of extending Frith to somebody just to kind of square it away in our own minds, to try to understand what it is that has happened, and to try to explain it to other people, honestly. And I think is the big one. I've used the words before that, to my the man I call brother, to Joe downstairs. I've used that word that I've extended Frith to Joe, and the Joe's extended to me, but in reality, we just kind of realized that it was a thing already, and we might as well just kind of roll with it. We didn't really have much of a choice. It just was. So I think to answer Simpatico's question, it's you can extend Frith, but that's only just saying that you extended is an acknowledgement of something that just is. I hope that all made sense.
Yes, it did. So let's go to Skullgrim's question. Should I extend Frith to family members who are mentally unstable and could possibly be dangerous? And I would like to start on this one.
Absolutely.
Yes. All right, next question.
Well, if
there's no extending Frith it's a situation where, and I've had this conversation with, and this especially comes into terms, it seems, with a lot of women in heathenry that I've had these conversations with, that there is someone within their family that has been abusive to them, and my answer has always been, you don't have to like them, but you might have to pick out their nursing home.
Right. Well, I mean, where I was going to go with that is, no, like we were discussing the previous question, is like you don't really extend Frith, and especially in this situation, an actual kin, actual family member. The Frith exists. The Frith is. The questions you have at this point is your family going to break that Frith? Because again, as we mentioned earlier, that is not your decision. That's the family's decision. And I think B is realizing exactly what your obligation is in this situation. Your obligation of Frith towards this person who might be mentally unstable and possibly dangerous is, and this is a subject that we probably should have touched on a little earlier, but we didn't, is that sometimes your obligation that is both for the best of the family and the best of the individual is going to be to bring in help. In this situation, the best thing for the individual and the best thing for the family might be to have that mentally unstable family member committed to people that can help them on a professional level, to try not to be unstable and dangerous, to try not to be potentially damaging to the rest of your family. Or, the same kind of concept applies. It's been said in the concept of Frith before that, if your brother comes to your door being chased by the cops, what do you do? And the answer is try to convince your brother to turn himself over without getting shot. Sometimes the answer is to go to the establishment.
Well, and I think that's important to think about. You also have to think, I think that's one of those where you literally think in terms of what is good for the tribe is good. Well, overall, what is the best thing going to be for the tribe if someone is ill? And either that's mental illness or physical illness, it's going to be to get that person's illness treated.
Absolutely.
And I think that is so important that sometimes it's like your parents. And I know that it's not something we do anymore, but sometimes the best things your parent can do is beat your kid when we were kids. Say discipline your child. Yes, you don't like it, and sometimes supporting someone doesn't necessarily mean doing whatever they want.
Crap. Lauren just created another episode we're gonna have to do, aren't we?
Yeah.
Do we beat our kids in heathenry?
Okay, if we have that episode, I am just not even. I don't beat my dogs, so I'm not in this fight. I don't have a dog in this fight.
I don't think any of us are qualified at this point to have that conversation.
That's a hearth or a house-based question.
Yeah.
We have no
nice
business.
Out, Toby. Nice out.
Good job.
That's entirely based on the roof tree. No, thank you. I actually, I'm going to go ahead and toot my own horn. We had a poster come into the sub a couple of months ago and asked about, hey, I have mental illness. Is heathenry right for me? And I said,
I remember him.
Here's the problems you're going to have. Here's the challenges you're going to face. And that gets down to the concept of this is not easy. This is not this is simple, but it's not. It's difficult. It's dangerous. Yes, Frith exists between you and a family member. Assuming that Frith does exist between you and this family member, their mental illness is a challenge upon which you are faced to overcome. And there are people out there that have really great family lives. Much less than you think, but more than you suspect. I grew up in an amazing family. My parents were amazing to me. They were loving and kind and supportive. That doesn't mean they didn't occasionally screw me up one way or another. But that's what families do. They break you in such a way that you fit only with them, and they keep you around forever. It's kind of like a marriage that way. But sometimes life just sucks, and yes, you just have to suck it up, and you have to deal with the pile of poo in front of you, sitting around there pretending the poo doesn't exist, or moving your entire home just so you don't have to deal with this entire poo situation. That's no way to live. Clean the poo up.
Well, I'm going to say this as someone who, I have been very open about the fact that I do suffer from both physical and mental illnesses. I've tried to make it something that I'm not ashamed of. It just is, because I don't like the baggage that we have in our overculture with it being. But at the same time, I look at the fact that as long as that's also a thing where I don't use it as an excuse. And if you're a heathen and you have a disability like I do, where you're blind or you have a mental illness or whatever, it's not an excuse. It's not an excuse to relieve you from your responsibilities to your family. So let's hit. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. You just brought up a sort of a point that has a little bit of a worthy tangent to it. Is the idea of not allowing it to relieve you of your obligations to your family, but also not allowing it to put more obligation on your family than it ought. There was a question asked recently somewhere, I don't even remember where, that led to the idea of part of Frith is being very careful not to overburden your family with your own issues. Sometimes the answer is not to call up your sister or your father or your brother and unload all of your damn problems on them, unless you need them to help you sort those problems out, because you are just increasing their stress level as well as your own. And I see this regularly in my wife's family. Is there are a couple of members of her family that seem to solely exist to bitch about their lives. And this puts a lot of stress on my wife that they'd never see. And there have been a few times where she's just completely bowed out for a little while because she can't fucking handle it. And people, especially people that do have issues, whether they be physical or mental, need to be cognizant of that. That yes, you have, absolutely the right to try to search for that sort of moral support from your family that you need, but you need to be careful not to overburden them with it.
And like you said earlier, there are professionals out there for a reason. And get your butt to therapy if you have a mental illness, and if you've got a physical illness, get your butt to a doctor. But I hate to say that being miserable, unfortunately, is not a mental illness. Bitching about life consistently, not a mental illness.
Right.
So they can treat it.
There are people out there that absolutely get paid to listen to you bitch about your problems. So don't necessarily have to turn that on your family all the time, because they have problems too, and they're not getting paid to listen to yours.
So we have a question from Kevin. Ale Glad, or I won't go into what I thought his name was for a long time, but he's been a host on our show before.
Ale Glad. Ale
Glad. I'm sorry. That makes more sense to me, and I have a screen reader that reads it that way. So, what role does a right goodwill play in Frith?
So, right goodwill, Brian defined it on last week's show. It's basically the default concept of extending somebody the benefit of the doubt, assuming that that person has your best interest at heart. If somebody says something, don't assume that they're saying that to make you feel bad. Don't assume that there's a hidden meaning there. My sister has a tendency to read into a lot of my questions as I'm trying to tell her things. For example, I sent her a text last week. Did you talk to Mom? And my question was, hey, I haven't heard from my mother in a couple of days. Have you talked to her? The answer I got back was, no, why? What do I need to do? Is everything all right? And I was like, have you talked to Mom?
We're uncomplicated people.
But to be fair, though, if you know your sister does this, it's probably a good idea to couch it with, I haven't talked to Mom in a couple of days. Have you spoken with her?
Oh, I send her things just because I know she's gonna set off. I sent her an obituary I wanted published in the event of my death and I said, there is no hidden meaning here. This is just because you're the executor of my estate, such that it is 12 books and a box fan. But yeah, having right goodwill means that my sister would assume that I'm asking a question, and that I would take the extra benefit of the doubt, or the extra step to say, I haven't talked to Mom since Tuesday. Have you talked to her lately? Do I need to call her? What's going on in your life? That kind of thing. Right goodwill is the grease or the lubricant upon which the muscles of Frith don't seize. Right goodwill is that thing that allows the different pieces of Frith to move in harmony.
I think that's an excellent answer.
I think it is. I mean, I have to admit that unfortunately here that we're using terminology that I'm not terribly familiar with using.
Not my wheelhouse.
Yeah, I'm not sure I entirely understand the use of the term right goodwill.
But when we do our take a look at Theodish belief, we'll be sure to expand on that. I do want to go ahead. I think you guys have any final thoughts on Frith you want to share before we close out?
Well, I mean, I think we've covered an awful lot here, and we've been trying to cover the questions as well as we can. This has been an opportunity to kind of take a lot of the scattered conversations we've all had about Frith that have ended up going off into wild tangents all over the place, and make everybody sit down for an hour and a half and listen to us talk about it without being able to interrupt. So we might have actually just said what we wanted to say for once, and that's fantastic.
Toby?
It's the best thing and that you will ever experience short of parenthood. It is the hardest thing you will ever do. It is foundational, and it is important, and you will never understand it until you let go and allow yourself to experience it.
All right, so thank you for being with us tonight, Toby. Got a few announcements we need to get to before we head out here. We have our winner of our contest we ran on Facebook this week for a brand spanking new copy of We Are Our Deeds, put out by White Marsh Press, which Brian last week, I don't have my camera on. I don't know why I'm holding my book up to the camera right now. And Brian, who was our guest last week, and so the winner of that is Dylan Giddings. So Dylan, please contact me on Facebook or on Reddit, and I know who you are on Reddit, so just contact me one of those places so I can get your address so I can get that sent out to you this weekend. Don't forget that we are archived on iTunes, Stitcher, pretty much any major platform. We're there. So definitely, share us with your friends. Get people to listen to the live broadcast. Like us on Facebook and whatever that thing is you do on favorite us on YouTube, I guess. Subscribe to us on YouTube. I don't know anything about YouTube. Follow us on Twitter. It's at @heathen_talk. And do we have any more plans on Cascadia Mute?
We're still working on the details right now, narrowing it down to exactly where we're going to do it so that we can keep the cost as low as possible and make sure that the location is as equally inconvenient to everybody as possible.
I appreciate that.
We're expect an announcement out within the next 2 weeks. We are getting all the details together. We're gonna. I'm really excited about it. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. If things work out where we're looking at, I think it's going to be really cool. On that, I want to take the moment to say thank you to both of you for having me on. I do appreciate it. Do we have any more announcements?
That was all I had to hit with Cascadia Moot. Just stay tuned. We will have the big announcement here in a few weeks. I'll just keep pestering Torin until it happens. Because I got to book my tickets, so y'all got to make up your minds.
Well, yeah, obviously we're really excited that you're coming. I guess if you want to get a little bit of preliminary information, we can at least say as much as it's definitely planned to be a Friday through Sunday affair. Whatever ticket price or entry fee that we finally settle on is going to be one that includes lodging and food for the weekend. We're working on a way to keep the price as low as possible. We're definitely not looking to profit off of this, and if it turns out that we take in more money than it costs, we'll find some way that weekend to spend it. Maybe we'll do a booze run. Who knows?
I do want to also say, if you have original Heathen music, artwork, anything you want to share with us, we like sharing it. Please send that in to us. You can Facebook, email, whatever. Also, if you have someone you would like for us to toast, because we shouldn't be coming up with all these ideas. We want to hear who's doing good in your community. Please let us know any of the ways you can get a hold of us.
Absolutely, and on that same note, with the artwork concept, we are talking about trying to do some Cascadia Moot t-shirts. So if anybody has some good art, a good idea for that, or a good design, just go ahead and forward it on to us here or on any of the social media platforms that we apparently use.
So on that note, I am on a plane in 24 hours to head to Pennsylvania for Summer Stow. If you're heading that way, I'm looking forward to meeting you. I'm going to stay away from the stairs, and just remember, you're doing it wrong.
And you're not the boss of me.
We'll see y'all next week.